Hello. We were going to both say hello at the same time. So we are here to do our back to school Facebook Live. So we want to talk all about kind of some of the prep work for going back to school, maybe some of the transition stuff between 6th class and first year. We're probably going to be doing this for about 15 or 20 minutes. So again, if you do have questions, type them into the comment box as soon as you can. So to make sure that we can get to them. We have a few comments already and questions. But yeah, it's really important that you get them in as soon as you can. So will you introduce yourself, Emma?
Yes. So my name is Emma McGee. I am the Senior Educational Psychologist here with Dyslexia Ireland. And I'm excited to be back here with Amy doing another Facebook Live.
Yeah, we had a bit of a break from each other.
We really did. Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, I missed you. So my name is Amy Smith. I am the Information and Advocacy Coordinator with the Dyslexia Association. So we've been kind of really doing a lot of work around Irish exemptions. That was taking up our time for the last few weeks. But now we're back to do just a little bit on back to school. So again, if you have any questions, pop them in a comment box and we'll get to them. But we have a few that have been sent in to us over the past week. So will we kick off with those?
Yeah, I think maybe the first one I might give you that one, Amy. So this is just regards to the little 8-year-old boy going back to school and getting a new teacher this year.
Okay.
How do I talk to that young child, or how does a parent talk to that young child about this new teacher? Especially if, anxiety is an issue. Or they might have had experience before of teachers that were not very patient.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's a big one, and it can be a huge issue for some children who are kind of struggling with the idea of change. I think with dyslexia, if you already have a somewhat anxious kind of personality, dyslexia is just really another unknown factor. So that can be a little bit difficult. I would be as honest as possible, and I think that you need to talk to the child about the fact that they're going to have a new teacher and things might be a little different in the new teacher's classroom, just so they can expect that. You're not trying to scare them, and I think sometimes parents maybe don't talk about those possibilities, and then their child is a little flustered when things are different. So I think we need to acknowledge that there will be a difference, but that the core things will remain the same, that this teacher will know that they're dyslexic, that this teacher knows that they don't like to read out loud in class, and that they maybe won't be doing Irish, or that this teacher knows that they go out for resource hours. So those things will remain constant. It might just be a different kind of setup in the classroom, or a different layout in the way that they do work. So it's about having that really honest conversation with your child. Another thing that I think is really useful as well is just ensuring that the teacher knows about your child's dyslexia. So if you can get a meeting with them, and kind of speak to them about what to expect this year and kind of your child's needs and things like that, but also write them a letter. I find that that's really helpful to kind of introduce your child to them. You can take the score box often from the assessment. So you can kind of show what their reading speed is like and things like that, and put that in. Now the school should have a copy of the assessment in general anyway, but again, you could just be kind of pointing out and highlighting those particular things about your child and their dyslexia. That just again means that your child has added confidence that the teacher knows they're dyslexic, and that there are some kind of consistencies around what the kind of teaching that they'll be receiving. Again, a little bit away from the whole maybe a child who's 8 years old and the transition then to second level, I would always say that every teacher in second level needs to know that your child's dyslexic. And we get an awful lot of interaction from parents. I get a lot of phone calls to say, listen, they're having a really hard time with the history teacher, and then a parent comes in and is ready to have this face off midway through the year with the history teacher at the parent teacher meeting, and the history teacher says, oh God, like I didn't realize they were dyslexic, I was never told. And you're very mad because you may have told the principal, or you may have told someone in particular, and it just feels very much like, oh, that information didn't trickle down. And sometimes that does happen.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
So what I suggest usually is to write a letter that introduces your child. Brian is really excited to study history. He loved reading about the 1916 Rising in 6th class. Just to let you know, Brian's dyslexic. He doesn't like reading out loud in class. Maybe if he puts up his hand, pick him like you might the other kids. However, maybe don't put him under pressure to do that. Again, things like not being too harsh on spelling corrections. maybe using a green pen instead of a red pen if your child finds that very distressing, to kind of look down a page full of red scribble marks. That can be hard. So yeah, I think adapting to a new teacher and adapting to change can be difficult, but I think the child needs to be at the center of the conversation around it. And maybe again, talking about if the child does have anxiety, what are they anxious about, and can you mediate any of those unknown factors, which I think is really helpful too.
Okay, so brilliant. So being very honest with the child, communicating with them, and then also informing schools and teachers then about your child's needs then.
Yeah, so we're not batting away that kind of anxiety, because it's totally natural to feel like that. And some people take change better than others. So not saying, oh, you'll be grand, don't worry about it. It's maybe talking about, yes, things are going to be different. But again, if things are scary or horrible, you know you can talk to mom and dad, and we will go back in and we'll talk to teacher. This is not a finite situation for you, and things are going to be fine, but it will take a little bit of getting used to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Amy.
Good. We have another question here, and that is, if my child meets criteria for an exemption, but they're in 6th year. So how do I go about that, and what do we know about that so far?
Okay, well, I can take this one. As Amy mentioned, we have done an awful lot of work recently with regards to the Irish exemption, and we have been told so far that the Department of Education are issuing a up-to-date circular with regards to the Irish exemption. Now, they haven't fully released the entire circular. They've released some points about it. So what I would say is that if you're querying now whether or not your child meets the new criteria for the exemption, we don't know 100% exactly what the new rules are about. So it might be worth waiting until the new circular comes out within September, or even just right now approaching your school and saying to them, listen, this is the report. They are really, really struggling with the Irish, and can we possibly have a conversation around if Irish exemption is possible, given the new circular. You may have to wait until that new circular comes out so that the principal is 100% sure that they now meet the new criteria. I suppose just very, very briefly, we've talked about this before, but it is important that your child still has the minimum amount of 6 subjects. So if they don't do Irish, they still need to have 6 subjects at least for their Leaving Cert. We will be updating you soon, within the next month or two, as soon as basically as soon as we hear about it. So I would just say stay tuned with regards to what to expect with the new circular. I think that's
so I think there may have been a little bit of confusion around, because they do have now a lower age limit. So again, you're not allowed to access the Irish exemption until 2nd class, and there was a bit of a worry, I think, from some parents, maybe that you couldn't, maybe there would be an upper limit, maybe they couldn't access an Irish exemption in 6th class. But we've seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that that would be the case. So if your child is going into 6th year and will now meet the new criteria, again, obviously you have to look up kind of if they meet that 6th subject, and if it is something that they want to drop. But again, we have no indication that there will be an upper age limit on when or if they can kind of activate or apply for that exemption. But it is a conversation between kind of you and the principal, and I think once we have the circular, we're going to do a Facebook Live, another one of these, just to kind of take you through it, maybe have a better idea of what tests they will be using to determine percentile scores. But definitely, if your child meets criteria and you want to activate it, it will now be between you and your school.
Brilliant.
We have another one that I think you might have to take as well. So this is a parent who wants to know, when does learning support kick in? So at what point kind of can you expect learning support?
Again, this really depends on the actual school itself and how organised they are at the beginning of the school year. It is important to remember that with dyslexia, like any type of learning difference, there is no guarantee that your child will receive learning support within school. How the schools organise this is that they have like a general allocation of support, and they decide who gets that based on need. So if depending on how many other students within the school have additional needs, whether it be, doesn't have to be learning difficulties like dyslexia, it can also be things like autism, behavioural difficulties, speech and language difficulties. Basically, they do it on a needs basis, and those that really, really need the support are more likely to receive it. So if your child does have dyslexia, particularly to a severe degree, they may then get it. But it does depend on the amount of support that's available within the school. When does it kick in? Like I said, it kind of depends. I would expect at least within, week 2 or 3 within school. Week 1 is very much settling in and getting back into everything. And I think, like Amy said, it is worth within the first week or so going into the school, reminding them about and reminding the new teacher, okay, my child has difficulty here with literacy, here is the report. Within the report, here are all the recommendations. And I would expect as well that teacher will have a conversation with the previous teacher about how that child got on the previous year. So I think give it a week at least, maybe go in, approach them within the second week with the report, maybe even, as Amy says, arrange a meeting with them and be like, okay, now that we're going into second class, third class, whatever it is, can we have a chat about how things are going, what the plan is for the year? These are the things that we focused on last year. We can see improvement in these areas. Therefore, these are some of the things that maybe we might like to have a look at. What do you think? And see what comes out of that meeting. Maybe even have like a plan, an educational plan. Again, not mandatory. Some schools do write up a lovely, beautiful plan for students. Some don't. It doesn't necessarily mean that having the plan is better or worse, because you can have a lovely, as I said, beautiful plan, but it's not followed. I have a question about this. Yeah, go on.
So my question is, do you think that it's good for parents to kind of find out a little bit about what's being done in that resource time, or is any resource and all these resource equal, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's really, really important that parents are aware of what's going on, so that possibly that they can help out at home by supplementing, not kind of going back over, but just making sure that if they do want to do, say for example, they're doing the toe-by-toe phonics program in learning support, so that maybe they could complement that with maybe some of the phonic apps at home. So like, let me see, Hairy Phonics, Hairy Letters, Hairy Words. So it's a nice way of making sure that whatever they're learning and learning support, they're having an opportunity at home to do it. I suppose just go over it, reiterate it within a multi-sensory way, so learning it in one way in school and then doing it, as an app at home on the tablet. So I think, definitely a great idea just to keep in contact with them.
Yeah, okay. Brilliant.
I think, we have another question here just around, somebody was asking within secondary school about subject choices. So it was around like, what subjects are good for students with dyslexia, what subjects should they avoid, or they, can't do or shouldn't do.
Yeah. So, this is one of my favorite questions, because I think there used to be this really weird preconceived notion that maybe people with dyslexia couldn't do or should avoid things like history or, geography, or kind of more wordy subjects, but that's absolutely not the case. I think that really a lot of people with dyslexia particularly like history, because they learn stories and they learn it's easier for them to learn off things about characters and people, because often people with dyslexia are such good people so they can learn things much easier like that. So I don't think that there is good and bad subjects. I will say that it's really important that you look out for particular things in a subject. So you want to find maybe a subject who will offer you some kind of a percentage of your overall grade before that final exam, which is really important. So I know history will allow you to do a project before the final exam that's about 20%, and the same for home ec, the same for geography. I know it's a kind of a journal, an ecological journal, but I think that there is that kind of aspect that's really important, again, especially if you have a little bit of nerves and a little bit of anxiety around big exams, like everyone does, but it certainly kind of can be worse for people with dyslexia, that you can say to them, listen, you've already got 20% before you even go in, because I've read your report, I've proofread it, the teachers proofread it, we know that it was word perfect, so you probably got all those marks, so you only need to do a certain amount when you go into that exam, and it can take kind of a lot of that stress stress and strain off them, which I think is particularly good. It can kind of put them at ease a little bit. Again, sometimes dyslexic people can be very arty and things like that. So if your child does show a proclivity really for any subject, I think they should be encouraged for it. I don't think that there's such a thing as kind of more wordy subjects or easier subjects for people with dyslexia. And that being said, if your child is considering picking up a language, sometimes it's useful to check if Spanish or Italian is available in your school. Usually they say that Spanish and Italian are a little bit easier to pick up for people who are dyslexic because sentence structures and grammar is a little bit easier. Again, then they think that German is a little bit easier than French. So just in terms of kind of if you are thinking about taking up a subject, a language subject, what language subjects are available? And I will say, in particular, I've noticed a few schools recently have been getting kids to do 2 languages in the first year.
Okay.
So they've gotten them to do maybe German and French in the first year, and then they choose between the 2, which is great. However, some children with dyslexia can again find that very confusing because you're kind of in a situation where you're starting 2 subjects at the same time, 2 brand new languages at the same time. And you kind of can get confused between the phonics of that language, the sentence structure, the grammar rules are all completely separate, but you're starting at the start. So it might be something to consider if your child is struggling with learning 2 new modern languages in the start of first year, to maybe talk to the school and see if you can pick one or prioritize one. Just because I think that there is that difficulty around starting 2 subjects kind of brand new.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it would be a good idea just to pick one and focus on one for a child. I know that maybe they want you to experience 2, but again, you know, we are not in a kind of a one-size-fits-all system. It's not appropriate that your child would kind of be forced to do the same things as everyone else. Sometimes special kind of dispensation or just a little bit of kind of common sense when it comes to your child is definitely really important, and I think the school has to weigh in on that as well.
Okay, perfect, brilliant.
We have a question here from Melissa, and she says that her son was diagnosed this week and is very upset about school. He's turned 9, and that obviously they're really glad they know, but it's just kind of to reassure him that everything's going to be okay. And that's a really interesting one. I think it can be sometimes a scary thing to kind of find out that you're dyslexic and stuff like that, but I do think that it's so important that your child learns about dyslexia and learns to maybe even like the word dyslexia. Personally, I think that there's huge conversations go on about kind of labeling children, but in my opinion, dyslexia is not a label. Dyslexia is something that gets rid of a lot of labels. So I think children who have been struggling may think that they're stupid or thick or lazy or any of the words that get bandied around maybe about them, or that they might think about themselves. And dyslexia is almost this new word that doesn't have baggage associated with it, that they kind of get to kind of grab with both hands, and maybe it's a bit of a fresh start. And I think if you can see it like that, then that's something that's brilliant. There's some really good books out there that explain dyslexia. So Dyslexia is My Superpower is brilliant. It goes around the world and it has stories from dyslexic people of all ages, from all countries in the world, including Ireland, and they talk about their dyslexia and how they feel about it. I think that's fabulous. We run Dyslexia and Me here, which is a program that I created to support dyslexic children. It's like a self-esteem 2-hour workshop where we talk all about what dyslexia is, what it means, and some of the feelings around dyslexia. So if you look on the website, you'll see details of upcoming Dyslexia and Me courses. We've just finished 2 of them.
Yes, well, 4 of them over 2 days.
4 of them
yes.
over 2 days,
Yeah.
yes. We had about, I'd say about 80 children through the door over the last 2 days, so we're wrecked.
Absolutely,
We're going to enjoy the weekend. But yeah, it's things like that where they can come together, meet other dyslexic children, and realise that it's not such a weird thing.
It demystifies things as well, like, absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't think dyslexia should be a dirty word in your house. I think it should be a word that's used. I think it should be something that's talked about, and that children aren't afraid to ask questions about. Because again, I think I've spoken about this before, that I'll stand up for 2 hours and speak about my dyslexia and about my journey with dyslexia, and I'll have parents come up to me at the end and they say, "Oh, my little boy has dyslexia." And they whisper it at me, and we whisper bad news. We whisper things we're embarrassed about. So I don't think that we should whisper dyslexia. I think we should shout it and embrace it and learn all about it and take ownership of it, because your child is going to be dyslexic forever. They will have to tell, or they have the right to tell, employers and colleges and teachers all about their dyslexia, and they have the right to expect that those institutions and those people respect their dyslexia and give them the help and support that they need. So you want to really empower them in speaking about dyslexia, because it's going to be a part of their life forever. So it's not something that you want to start off kind of on a bad foot with.
Absolutely. I think the earlier that starts, the better, definitely. And coming from both the home and within the school as well. And so when you are talking to the teachers about dyslexia, or about your child's dyslexia, do let them know, we like to talk about it, and that maybe it might be a great idea to be able to do like a Dyslexia Awareness Day, or Dyslexia Awareness Week is coming up in October, asking the teacher if it's possible, can you do a little bit of a piece on dyslexia and what it is and what it's not. A lot of our young kids that came in over the last 2 days, they all kind of said they wished that the teacher was able to support them in being able to teach other kids about what it is, because they find it really hard to sometimes describe it themselves.
Yeah. So I think even a neurodiversity day, because I'm sure there are children with different needs. You have kids with dyscalculia, kids with dyspraxia, kids with ASD, and difference is really our strength in terms of like workforces are stronger and better when people are different and have different talents, and we work better as a society. If everyone was the same, it would be very dull. So again, it's that kind of empowering over difference, but also maybe learning about other people's differences, and that everyone is not everyone is different, and that's fine, and we should totally embrace that.
Yeah, perfect, lovely.
Great. So we have two more questions here. So again, if you're sitting there and you have a question, please pop it into the comments in the next few minutes, because we'll be finishing up when we finish the questions. So do let us know. So the next one is about ebooks. And that's kind of when a child might be using a tablet or a laptop in school, and then if they're going to maybe an iPad secondary school, so it's about kind of getting those ebooks and what kind of access to them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I suppose just very briefly, there are a lot of schools out there that are just iPad schools. There are some that have just the actual hard books. I think for any student, particularly any student with dyslexia especially, having the ebook version, whether they have the tablet or not within the school, is a really, really good idea. It means then that they have access to the particular book at home. So if they
I'm laughing because I was the child who forgot her book every time. My poor mum at 8:30 at night would be ringing another mum to see if we could get a lend of a book. So again, having a second book or access to a copy of a second book is very helpful.
Very handy, all right. And it's good for the bag as well. You're not having to bring home every single book. So it eliminates that area of organisation. We're going to talk a little bit about organisation now in a minute, but that at least eliminates that need of, okay, I have to bring this book home, that book home. How to get the ebooks? Well, I think it's, first of all, it's good to know that with your educational psychology report, you can actually use that to get access to ebooks for free just by contacting the publishers. So if you go to the publisher of each book, you can ask them for a copy of the ebook. They may look for evidence of the dyslexia, so you just show them the report, and then they give you access to the ebook. You can access the ebook either on a tablet or a laptop. So whether you have a tablet, Android or iPad, it works on all of them. And I suppose some of the good things about this is that you can you can use them a little bit more in that they're a little bit more adaptable. If the textbook is on the iPad, you can increase the size of the screen. You can make the text bigger. You can also, if it's a very kind of wordy textbook, if it's like a history book and there's 2 huge pages full of text, you can actually highlight the text and have the tablet read out what's on the screen, which is pretty handy. So that's text-to-speech software. And then there's other functions like, you can highlight it, you can kind of do little doozles on it where you wouldn't necessarily maybe do on an actual textbook. So there are some definite pros for having the ebook. I think one of the biggest ones is just having that second copy. So yeah, I think that's kind of all for the ebook.
Yeah, definitely.
I mentioned about organization. Now, I mean, obviously, you know, books are the only thing you have to organize. Within secondary school, that there's a big jump between primary and secondary school with personal organization. One parent's just looking for information about how can they help to support their child with dyslexia in secondary school when it comes to just organization.
Yeah, and it is a big task. I think that the change between kind of having all your books on a little basket on your table in primary school and then going to having so many more subjects, and you have things kind of like you could be on 2 different levels for your school. You could have, you know, you have home ec and things like that where you have to bring things in. So that can be like an awful lot of organization that's needed. I am really good at sticking to organizational plans when they're put in place, but I'm really bad at coming up with them. So if your child is similar to me, you might have to try and help them with that initial structure. And it can be trial and error as well. I think you can do something and say, listen, we'll reassess this 3 months in and see if it's still working or if it needs to be tweaked. But again, things that I like to look out for, I think color coding is very helpful. So I think that things like getting big folders, the big colored folders, you can get them in Eason's, and putting in kind of the history textbook, the history past exam papers, and kind of a refill pad and a pen as well, means that they kind of can just look into their locker, see blue, know that blue has the history stuff, reach in, grab it and leave. Again, it's the same for things like English and maths, where if you have, like, say, a red one for maths, you have the past papers, the maths book, you know, the protractor, all of the stuff you need, all in one place. So again, you're not kind of rifling through a school bag trying to get bits from all over the place. I think that it's really important, initially especially, to get kind of big folders and sort everything out into that, just to help you keep track of kind of what you need. Again, in relation to color coding, things like printing out timetables and having them everywhere. Like, I mean, on the back of their bedroom door, in your kitchen, on the inside of your front door before they leave, in the bathroom while they're brushing their teeth, and just the ability to be able to look at the timetable all the time to make sure they're looking at the same day, and if possible, color code the timetable as well. So if you've got a blue folder for all your history stuff, history is coloured in blue on the timetable as well. So again, they don't even have to read it. They just know that blue is synonymous with their history stuff. So they have history tomorrow for a double class after lunch. I also really think that now is the time, that is the time to be teaching your child kind of accountability, and the fact that they are for the rest of their lives going to have to be kind of strengthening their organisational skills as best they can. So if they have their own phone, things like setting alarms the night before, say if you have home ec on a Wednesday, setting an alarm for 6:30 on a Tuesday evening, which reminds you to get your ingredients for home ec. That's really good, because again, it's their personal, they're looking after themselves. They can say to you at 6:30, listen, Dad, I need to go to Tesco, I need to get this stuff for home ec. So you're not there at 7:30 in the morning, running through the aisles looking for stuff to make lasagna. But yeah, things like that are really good. Again, it's the same for PE, setting that alarm the night before to make sure that they have their kit bag done, that their kit is washed, that they have their football boots in their bag. Things like that mean that they're really focusing on personal responsibility, but also it means that you're setting them up for success in life. Again, you don't want to be the person who's ringing their 21-year-old in college to remind them that they've an exam the next day. You know, you want them to be self-sufficient. You want them to be able to learn these types of things. So I think things like that are really helpful. Often I get asked, is there anything that they can say to the school in relation to organisation? And I say, if you have any control over kind of how the lockers are divvied out, it's a really good idea to ask for a locker that's kind of head on and at the end of a row. Now, I know that that's the Rolls Royce of lockers for anybody, but it just means that, again, if you think about it, your child's not trying to kind of be kind of pushed off anything, but even reading things upside down, because you're kind of bending down to look for stuff and having to read things upside down. So again, things like that are really important and will just make that wee bit of difference and make things a little bit easier. Yeah, that's kind of what I kind of generally say about organisation. I think that it's...
And I think it's one of those things that, like, when people think of dyslexia, they think, yeah, reading, writing, spelling difficulties, but organisation does come into it, absolutely, and a lot of it's one of those traits that people with dyslexia often have difficulties with organisation, and we don't tend to see it until secondary school.
Yeah, and I think that, again, we have, I struggled with this when I was growing up as well, is the idea that kind of we think sometimes the people with dyslexia are messing a bit when they're trying to get organised. So I respond really well to colour. So if you were to go in and look at my desk here in DAI, it's like a unicorn vomited on it. It's full of colour. But colour indicates to me things that are important, things that have to be done today. I have things in different coloured folders, and it's what I respond to most. I also use, I firmly believe that if you shake a dyslexic person hard enough, one of those 4-colour pens will kind of fall out of them somewhere. And again, that was how I coped in secondary school and college, was that I was able to write things in different colours, and I was kind of automatically would know what was important to me on a page, because I could filter out the information that was in different colours. So again, if your child responds to colour, and if they highlight a whole page and you're thinking to yourself, they're messing a little bit here, I think sometimes it's not messing, it's genuinely just what makes it stick in their head. So maybe just, sometimes they are messing, obviously, but I think keep an eye on them, and if they are kind of religiously responding to colour and are doing things in a way that kind of makes you think that actually colour is a huge part of their organisation, I think it's really important to stick with that and kind of encourage that as well.
Yeah, perfect, brilliant.
So we have 2 questions here,
I think,
and maybe the first one from Amanda is that you mentioned that a child needs 6 subjects for state exams. If they have an Irish exemption, do they need to take up an extra subject in secondary school?
Yeah, so I mean, in short, yeah, you need to have 6 subjects. Yeah,
because you usually do 7. So you have that like little bit of a cushion. So usually all secondary school students will do 7 subjects, which means that you only count 6 of them. So you get to put your lowest score aside. So if your child has an Irish exemption, they do need to be doing at least 6 subjects, but it's important to bear in mind they do not have that cushion. So if they are only doing 6 subjects, they will be, the points from all 6 subjects will be the ones that they need for college. So they will be the ones that are counted for CAO. So sometimes I know that people with Irish exemptions will sometimes do ag science or music or something, an extra subject they can do outside of school, because again, that means that maybe that they have a bit of lever and they can kind of pick which of the 6 they're going to have counted when it comes time for leaving cert. I will also say, if your child has an Irish exemption and is not doing a modern language either, so they're not doing French or German or Spanish, that may mean your child's only doing 5 subjects, so they will have to take up an extra subject. They will have to be doing a minimum of 6, and it's really important that you make sure that that's what's happening.
I think it means that they get the maximum amount. They have the opportunity to get the 600 points. They also have the opportunity to apply to the NUI colleges. So NUI Maynooth, NUI Galway, one of the other NUIs.
I've got in trouble before. I said UL, and I don't think UL is.
So they require 6 subjects. They do recognise an Irish exemption, and they do say that, okay, if you have an Irish exemption, you don't have to have the usual Irish in the modern language, but they still require you to have your 6 subjects if you wish to apply.
So just keep an eye on that and make sure that that's, so in practice everyone does 7. So if your child is not doing Irish, then they're down to 6. So you may want to consider doing an extra one, or you may focus on the 6 and think that that's fine, but you cannot dip below the 6.
And the last one then, if you want to maybe, Amy, take this one. Deirdre was saying that her son is dyslexic and dysgraphic, so a difficulty with handwriting as well. I find it so difficult to get him motivated, and that he does exactly what's asked of him for homework, but doesn't push himself that little bit extra to do a little bit more.
Yeah, that's really hard. Because I'd say he's just wrecked. And there is no kind of technical way to explain it. Like, often, because people with dyslexia are working really, really hard to keep up, and they're kind of paddling and paddling and paddling like a kind of a swan. Sometimes they look very serene on top, and on the bottom they're really kind of going for it just to keep afloat. That can sometimes mean that they're very tired, and sometimes just even getting to the end of homework can be really hard. We often ask kind of just before summer starts, parents ask us like, what should they be doing over summer and what can I get them to do? And while it's important to keep up a little bit of literacy over the summer so you don't forget, it's also really important that they do the normal children thing.
Right.
Yeah, that they learn. I remember speaking to a parent one day about how their child was doing about 3 hours homework, and this child was only 12. And I was saying, you know, while it's important that they get their homework done, they're just coming home from school, doing their homework, having their dinner, and going to bed. Whereas other children are out playing, they're learning social skills, their fitness skills. Yeah. So you want your child to be able to do all of those things and make friends and take advantage of all of that stuff. So I think sometimes while we really want to focus on improving and all that sort of stuff, I think sometimes we have to make sure that that's not cutting them off from any of the things that they have to learn as a child. A big thing we say is if your child is going to a workshop or if they're doing extra tutoring, that night they shouldn't do homework from primary school anyway. So if on Wednesday they go to the workshop for 2 hours, they're focusing on their literacy. So to come home and start homework after that is far too much to ask.
It's like a punishment to have to go to the workshop as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say I definitely think, depending on the age of your child, bargaining is a good idea. So maybe once a week or twice a week they do a little bit of extra work, or they learn a bit of assistive technology around how to type, or they do something that you know will serve them in the future, but it's not every night once they're getting their homework done. Because I do think I can totally appreciate why a child might be just really tired.
Yeah, and then having those short-term goals, I think it is very, very difficult for a young child to see the bigger picture and to see the long-termness of things, and to know that this is all for that kind of very end goal. So having those short-term goals and just breaking it down into, you know, smaller chunks, and then having those rewards at the end of the week. Well done, you did your homework 4 nights out of 4, you know, absolutely brilliant. You spent the half an hour that we allocated for homework, worked really, really hard during that time, and here's, you know, the Friday treat. I think that can be really, really helpful.
I'm also just such a big fan of making things that they were going to get anyway as their treat. I'm going to be such a cheap parent. But I do think that making things like you were going to go on holidays to see the Cliffs of Moher, or they needed new shoes because their shoes were falling apart. And it's like, no, you did this, you earned this, kind of that sort of a kind of attitude means that they get a little bit of kind of more information.
Oh, we have just one more question in. I might take this one just before we go, if that's okay. Just around times tables. This is a really tricky one because
I'm like stressed out. You mentioned times tables freak me out.
So first thing I would say is that it is not essential to have to learn off your times tables. There are some kids and some adults that just cannot retain them, cannot remember them, and to be honest, it doesn't really matter too much. Once you get to secondary school, everyone has a calculator. You can do 9 times 5 on the calculator quite quickly. Yeah, you might be, you know, a few seconds behind that person that was able to read them off by heart, but it's not the end of the world. So I would say definitely if it is beginning to get stressful, and if you are going over a certain amount of time trying to remember them, just cut it. Instead, maybe even having a look at the patterns of numbers. So that might be a better way. That will also develop that number sense. So for example, the 5 times tables, getting them to become familiar with, okay, so to see the way it goes from 5, then a 0, then a 5 and a 0, so 5 and 10, and then 15 and 20. Getting them maybe to remember the key ones. So, you know, what happens when it's 10 times something. So,
I love the 10 times tables. They were my favourite. And 12 for someone.
They're a hard one.
No, I like the 12.
So what is 5 times the particular number, and what is 10 times the particular number? And then you kind of work around that. Now, if you really, really want to get technical, there are books and literature around learning the times tables. I know that there is one called What to Do When You Can't. It's a series of books. So What to Do When You Can't Learn the Times Tables. And it's by Steve Chin, and Chin is spelled Chinn. So they have what to do when you can't tell the time, what to do when you can't add, subtract, multiply, but there is one on times tables. I don't really know how good it is because it is a little bit technical, the book, but if you want to have a little bit of a read up about it, I would just say don't stress out too much about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, sometimes when you speak to teacher and stuff like that, often kids are just given a calculator.
Yeah.
Because again, you know, they're not going to be sitting in secondary school kind of doing their times tables.
I think it's that common sense, like how useful is this as a skill for later on,
Also, I will say again, I think it's like I'm selling coloured like implements. I have this, but I think I remember on my wall, I used to have a really big. It was like, I'd say it was like A1 size, kind of huge big poster that had all the times tables down it. So it had 1 to 12 one side and 1 to 12 the other. And it was coloured. So again, it was coloured all the way along.
So easier to track with your eye.
Yeah, much easier to track with my eye, and much easier to kind of learn sequencing. So again, if you can kind of look into maybe if there's patterns, again in numbers, developing that number sense, but also correlate them with some colours to make, again, that maybe easier to identify.
Okay, brilliant.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for everyone who's joined us.
You.
We're going to save this on the page so you can watch this back in your leisure. If you have any requests for any particular Facebook Lives or topics that you'd like us to cover, don't be afraid to comment on this or send us a direct message on Facebook because we are trying to do this much more. We realise that this is very accessible for people and you can kind of go back and watch it. So if you do have any suggestions, please let us know. We'd be happy to do a video.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye now.
Bye.